Hi everybody, it's Robert Ogilvy, Team and Leadership Coach. So more on emotional intelligence. How many emotional intelligence competencies are there, and what are these competencies? So the main model I'm working from is the 6 seconds SAY, that SEI model, and that was mainly researched by Joshua Friedman and a bunch of others. I think it's late 90s, early 2000s, and then they actually do ongoing research in terms of statistical norms, in terms of different continents and locations, and then other ongoing nuances about implying this base survey in new ways to get basically new reports, new analyses out of it. But anyway, so this base model has, sorry, I'm just make sure I'm centered here in my webcam. 3 high-level categories and 8 competencies that fall under them. It also has a separate batch of other success or outcome factors. If you want to contrast that to another model, another big name you may have heard in the realm of emotional intelligence is Daniel Goleman, right? So his model uses, I think it's 4 categories and definitely 12 competencies, right? So I prefer the 6 seconds, the SAY model, because I think they do a better job of parsing out the proximal and distal variables. So the way they have their 8 competencies and the success factors that are composites of those, I think is a clear way to approach it. I think Daniel Goleman, and just kind of, I would frame it that his model with 12 competencies, it's almost like it lays out these 12 impact areas, but because some were a combination of others, I think it's not as precise as it perhaps could be, but it definitely, one thing I do like about it is it definitely is very clear and obvious kind of the reasons and the use cases of why you'd care about emotional intelligence, and that way I think the EQ, the 6 seconds model of EQ, is a bit more academically rigorous, and then is constantly putting effort to apply itself and clarify why this makes sense, whether it's to an individual or an organization or analyzing something more specific, right? Okay, anyway, so let's dive into what this 6 seconds model of emotional intelligence is, the SAY model. The 3 high-level categories are about awareness, or what they call knowing yourself. Then we have choosing yourself, or you can think of it as intentional decision-making, intentional application of emotions and will. And the last is motivation, or giving yourself. This also, in some sense, these have to kind of do with, having good motivation is also kind of relates to your resilience and how well you can kind of gird against and recover from challenges. Anyway, we'll get into this more technically. So the 2 competencies that fall under the knowing yourself category are enhanced emotional literacy. And so enhanced emotional literacy is, can you spot what you're feeling? Do you know what's going on? It doesn't, there's another one that deals more with the actual experiential sense of feeling what you're feeling, and particularly feeling what others are feeling. But this is like, do you know what you're feeling? And at the higher, more advanced levels, it's like, to what subtlety and layer do you know what you're feeling? So think emotionally for a second. Do you know the difference between when you're feeling kind of hot anger in the moment, or you contemplate on something more and there's a kind of a broody anger, or I don't know, maybe in kind of some romantic context, kind of frustration and anger, but maybe even like a bit of fascination, right? So the more you can understand the fine differences between emotions and all the different, simple emotions, which then compound and are complexly in play at the same time, that's all part of the emotional literacy. It also has to do with your ability to linguistically to verbalize and clarify kind of what you're feeling, right? The other EQ competency here is recognizing patterns. That's very long-term. Can you spot patterns in particularly your behaviors and your emotional and cognitive cycles, right? It also, to an extent, has to deal with others, but mostly it's like, I would call it long-term, strategic term self-awareness, right? So that makes sense, because this is all under the knowing yourself bucket. Second category, choosing yourself. And this is the biggest area. It has 4 competencies. And this makes sense because if you think of even probably people right? You can think of smart people which might in broad terms be aware. You might think of kind of energetic and motivated people, but they don't always seem to have good strategic impact or kind of lead their lives effectively. And a lot of success in our day-to-day and professional lives, it affects all these, but I would say a lot of this is in the choosing yourself category. It's how you're applying your will and your emotions. Okay, so first one here, applying consequential thinking. So this is What is this? This is strategizing. This is self-regulation. This is knowing how to create a win-win between people. Um, this is kind of the emotional feeling out when you need to kind of stop or be patient and when you need to drive forward, right? There's a bit of a context awareness to this. So yeah, again, people who are good at strategizing are good at this. Um, this particularly, I would say, has of all of them perhaps the most opportunistic tone, right? Can your emotions sense when there's something on the horizon that you should be going after, or what managing your approach and avoidance behaviors? That's all bound up in this one. Second, navigate emotions. Can you keep your stuff together? Can you stay composed, right? And so people who are very high in this, you might frame, we might think of them as confident or something like that. Part of it is that they can think on their feet and they're so kind of emotionally flexible that it's very hard to face them. And then on the low end, people that seem to freak out a lot, or just kind of lose composure, lose their sense of being able to be effective, right? That would be low on the navigating emotions, right? Third, we have engaging intrinsic motivation, which is around applying direct willpower or grit to problems and setting chosen goals, right? The good thing is, the willpower is great because we can apply it to solve our problems. People that are very high on this, they tend to have a very individualistic kind of agentic tone, right? They like applying willpower. They like the notion of choosing a goal and going after that goal. I'm like, I willed that goal, right? And certainly you could think of, there's certain situations where that can be very useful. Yeah, it's sometimes maybe more it's around drawing energy from others, but there are all times when I think we can see the value in setting, not just setting clear goals, but pointed effort towards things we're choosing. Last here is exercising optimism. So this is another factor that comes into being able to draw drive and motivation. So exercising optimism is probably the one most specifically key to our resilience. How quickly can we bounce back from challenges or setbacks? How quickly can we re-engage willpower? You could say it's about hopefulness. Excuse me, hopefulness. If you were a very kind of religiously, faithful, theistic person, you might frame it as kind of a faith quality. I think for most of us, it's more about, can I still see good outcomes on the horizon? And if I am in an emotional funk, how quickly can I bounce back and see positive things on the horizon? On the low end of that, you've probably known people which are depressed, or it feels like they don't have a lot of gas in the tank, and when there is some setback, they really kind of get stuck there. So they would be low in this end of things, right? And then the last two, which are in the giving yourself category, which is about motivation. So the first one here is increasing empathy. And this is both about what we are deeply feeling ourselves and being able to see and lean into that, to touch into that deep experience of ourselves, as well as to feel what others are feeling, and then as well as acting appropriately, right? Some people try to, I hear sometimes people try to kind of almost assume like, oh yeah, I'm aware of what I'm feeling, but being aware of what you're feeling, as well as responding appropriately, there's necessarily something kind of experiential and thus tactile about emotions. And then if we're really in touch with that, that really naturally steers us in certain intuitive directions about how to behave and navigate the situation for ourselves and others, right? And so that is very much a piece of this. And more the motivational sense, if you think of this as a functional output, one of the reasons this affects our drive and motivation is that the more we can empathize with ourselves and others, this becomes actually a source, a wellspring of motivation. It's one of the three factors that go into drive, right? So the more we're able to experience, what it's framed here, use the increasing empathy skill, the more we're able to draw motivation. And then the last, and I would say actually the biggest time scope of all of them, they kind of go from momentary to kind of tactical day-to-day decisions to kind of big scope stuff, is pursuing noble goals. So this is something that I think a lot of us might have some practical professional sense of like what is one step in front of another I need to take, but pursuing noble goals is like, what do I want for myself? What do I want to be known for? What is the point of my life? Maybe even one big step back from that. what do I want to be known for having contributed to, or like legacy, right? Um, it can morph and adjust a bit over time, but at its best, it is so well developed that it is very perennial and deep, and thus is able to permeate a whole range of decisions and relationships within our lives. Right? If you think of even one of the classic roles that religion has effectively, healthily served for us, is being able to transform suffering into something meaningful and useful by linking that to um, healthy outcomes, right? Healthy. So in some sense, we don't choose whether we suffer or not. We're human beings. We're gonna go through our up and down experiences and have our issues and limitations. Um, what we do actually have much more choice over is our goals, the things we want to pursue in life. What not only what makes us happy, but how we can be of service to the world. Um, from a kind of psychology standpoint, I often think of this also as like we're trying to create a positive linkage between our identities, how we see ourselves, our service role or our contribution to the world, our professional role in relation to the world, or even in relation to others, and then ultimately the positive outcomes, the legacy, the future we're driving towards. The more all three of these can be positive, our self, our service, and the future, the legacy we're driving towards, the more we can draw motivation, the more we can be resilient. The more it also has an integrative sense of bringing the pieces of our lives together, right? So this is definitely something that takes, in my experience looking at these, takes time to develop, but it can be really quite strong and amazing as you do. Anyway, so and then there's also some success factors. You heard me mentioning, this and that go into the drive success factor, and there's different other success factors and things we can look at that are composed of these different competencies. These competencies, when we look at them in the 6 seconds model, so just like an IQ test, they start at 100 plus or minus, so standard deviation of 15 points. So then what they've done is they've broken that up into the 5 quintile ranges. And so if you're in the middle range, that means you're an average rating for that, and on a day-to-day level, you can do what needs to be done in that area, but you're not stand out in it. And then if you're in one of the upper categories, you're that much kind of better, excellent. It's more of a natural area that you lean towards a lot. Or the opposite, the more it's in one of the bottom 2 ones, the more you struggle with that a little bit or maybe a lot on a day-to-day basis, right? There's something else I want to mention about this in terms of case conceptualizing, right? These are all good qualities. These are all things we want to bring together. But these are changeable competencies we can develop and work on over time. But the question then becomes, what do I want more of, if anything, right? So don't think you're going to be, in the top 5th quintile in all of these. That's unreasonable. But think about the 1 or 2 you may be wanting to develop, and really you tend to come at these from a kind of suffering standpoint of noticing the gaps they're causing in your life, and then designing more about what you want to move towards, right? Um, One more point about the highs and lows and how they tend to work together. Often we are. I think the term we designed for this was anchoring. You're linking a higher rating with a lower one as part of. You could think of it as compensating, but it's also kind of the natural processes you've learned to handle your particular strengths and weaknesses in these areas. So for example, there was someone I assessed, I think about a month and a half ago now, right? And they were quite low. They were first quintile in the navigate emotions, and so there was this kind of freak out quality for them, even in what seemed like day to day work, right? And they interpret that in a certain way, and at times it almost had this kind of paranoid sense of like people are professionally undermining them, or they're throwing them unfair curveballs that they really shouldn't be. And there was this freak out thing going on, but then there was in the 4th quartile, quite high, or quintile, was what was it? Engage intrinsic motivation, and so there was this activation of willpower whenever problems came up, and this is this person's most pronounced EQ competency, right? So the pattern that we when we talked about it, we were able to find was that this person has their little freakouts and breakdowns, or even in a professional sense of, oh my god, how can I possibly handle this, on a rather frequent basis, and then engages her willpower. That's her natural strength to be like, all right, I'm gonna choose a goal and put effort into it and do this thing, and that has other kind of ramifications about the way she's approaching it. But that was in some sense, a natural functional pattern she developed in terms of relating to those, right? Doesn't mean it's wrong or right, and obviously it comes out of, initially must have come out of some functional origin for that to develop, but that kind of shows you how different high and low scores can fit together. All right, so just to recap, there's a few different models of emotional intelligence, but really the best, the most robust, and the most statistically proven and developed one on the market right now is the 6-second SAY model, which has 3 high-level categories of knowing yourself, choosing yourself, and giving yourself, which break down into 8 particular EQ competencies. So that's what these EQ competencies are, and obviously figure out which ones you're good at and maybe not so good at, and where you might want to develop in the future. I'm Robert Ogilvie, Team and Leadership Coach. I'll talk to you guys soon.